Welcome back to the deep dive. So, if you were asked to name the single most important film in 21st century pop culture, you might list a few giants.
Sure.
But there's really only one true answer for the current blockbuster landscape. We're talking about Iron Man from 2008.
The one that started it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The movie that didn't just launch a franchise it fundamentally changed how Hollywood approaches superheroes and, serialized storytelling forever.
It's a singularity event. When you look back at that film now, knowing it started the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, this multi-billion-dollar cultural behemoth, it's just astonishing.
Right.
But our mission today is to look beyond the suits and the spectacle and really drill down into the messy, chaotic, and highly uncertain production process that actually defined the film.
Because it wasn't a sure thing.
Not at all. When this was being made, Marvel was taking an enormous, potentially company-breaking gamble.
Okay, let's unpack that. We're deep diving into a film that spent decades wandering through Hollywood's famous development hell.
Yeah.
A pivotal and very difficult casting decision with an actor who was still seen as a massive risk and a high-stakes emergency rewrite that basically saved the entire climax of the movie.
And we know this film is now considered a cultural benchmark. I mean, in 2022, the Library of Congress selected Iron Man for preservation in the United States National Film Registry.
Which is a huge deal.
It's a huge deal. That honor is for works deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. It really is the foundational text. But the story of how it got made is one of persistent failure finally turning into success.
That distinction alone proves this isn't just a superhero movie, it's a modern historical artifact. So let's start at the beginning. Just how long did it take to get Tony Stark out of the comic panel and onto the screen?
Well, the road was ridiculously long. Marvel Studios only reacquired the film rights in 2005.
2005, so before that.
Before that, for nearly 2 decades, Iron Man had been, tossed around various studios. Universal Pictures first bought the rights way back in 1990.
1990, wow.
Then 6 years later, 96, the rights were shuffled off to 20th Century Fox. And by 1999, the property had been sold again to New Line Cinema.
And that kind of constant shuffling suggests Hollywood really didn't know what to do with the character.
Not a clue.
And that lack of vision must have generated some truly bizarre alternate versions of what the film could have been.
It absolutely did. We have some fun trivia here, like Nicolas Cage expressing interest in portraying the character back in 1997.
Oh, I can see that.
And Tom Cruise showed interest in both producing and maybe even starring in 1998.
It's fun to imagine those versions, but the script concepts themselves show just how much they struggled. I mean, what were some of the weirdest ideas floating around?
The villain choices were, well, they were definitely interesting. The script developed during the Fox era, for example, featured MODOK.
MODOK, the giant floating head in a chair.
The giant floating head in a chair as the primary villain. That certainly would have set a very different, maybe less grounded tone for the very first MCU film.
That would have been a massive tonal gamble right out of the gate. And then when New Line had the project,
they hired screenwriter David Hayter, and he reportedly reworked earlier drafts, including ones that had the Mandarin, but his most structurally fascinating pitch was pitting Iron Man against his own father.
Against Howard Stark.
Right. Hayter's vision was making Howard Stark the villain war machine. The creative logic there was sound. They wanted to mirror the hero with the villain.
A tragic family drama.
Exactly, but it just underscores the problem. They lacked faith in Iron Man's actual rogues gallery. They were constantly trying to manufacture a more intimate villain.
And here's the ultimate what-if moment for early 2000s comic book movie fans.
Yeah.
For a brief moment, they considered linking Iron Man to Sony's existing Spider-Man universe.
That's right. Early scripts included a specific reference identifying Tony Stark as the creator of Dr. Otto Octavius's infamous bionic arms in Spider-Man 2.
From 2004.
Yeah. It shows how fragmented the whole comic book movie landscape was, and how Marvel Studios, before 2005, was still so tentative about whether they could even afford to start their own universe.
They were just looking for any established sandbox to play in.
Any port in a storm.
So after all that creative chaos, the clock was ticking. And by 2005, Marvel decides they have to bring Iron Man home and take control.
Precisely. In November 2005, the decision was made. Halt all external development. Start from scratch at Marvel Studios. This move was crucial.
And this is when they announced it as their first independent, self-financed feature.
They were betting their future on this. They were betting the farm.
And the risk was exponential because at that time, Iron Man was their only major character not yet successfully depicted in live action.
All the big names were gone. They had leased out Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and the Hulk. This was truly the last major piece of intellectual property they could control.
Which must have caused a lot of anxiety.
A huge amount. They went after about 30 different writers initially, and almost all of them passed. They just weren't interested in a relatively obscure tech-based character from a brand new studio.
It was a huge perceived risk.
A low point, for sure.
But they found their director in Jon Favreau, and he came in with a remarkably grounded, realistic vision, which was, that was key to making the character click.
He signed on in April 2006, and his influences were fascinating. He wasn't looking at other superhero films. He drew from political thrillers like Tom Clancy novels, spy franchises like James Bond, and gritty sci-fi like RoboCop.
He called it his independent film approach.
He did, and the first thing he did was update the origin story from the Vietnam War setting of the comics to modern-day Afghanistan, immediately grounding it in contemporary geopolitics.
But the high-stakes decision that truly defined the film and the entire future of the MCU came with the casting.
Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark.
An absolute non-negotiable choice for Favreau.
It was. He felt that Downey's own highly public life, his struggles, his chaos, his eventual triumphs, made him the only actor who could embody Stark's journey authentically.
He needed someone who could portray a likable asshole.
And someone who could undergo a believable emotional transformation. That was the core of it.
But the Marvel Entertainment executives were... what, not on board?
They were strongly, vehemently opposed, largely because of Downey's well-documented past and the insurance risks that came with him.
The resistance was intense.
It was. And it speaks volumes about the pressure Marvel was under. They were investing their own capital, and the last thing they wanted was a temperamental star. But Favreau refused to back down.
He just kept insisting he was the best creative choice.
He did. Downey even recorded an audition tape just to help persuade them, but even that wasn't immediately enough.
So Favreau executed the ultimate Hollywood power move to get his guy.
He leaked it. He leaked the news to the press that Downey was in talks for the role.
And the public reaction?
Overwhelmingly positive. The wave of enthusiasm essentially forced the executive's hand. The audience already knew this was the right choice. With that public momentum, they had no choice but to move forward.
And the cost for that universe-defining role. Downey was signed in September 2006 for a remarkably modest $500,000.
It's almost impossible to believe now, knowing his later salary history.
A tiny fraction of his ultimate worth to the franchise.
But that initial hard-won belief in the character allowed Downey to shape the film from the inside out. He was insistent that Stark should never turn into some generic hero, what he called
Dudley Do Right.
Dudley Do Right, yeah. He wanted the character to retain his biting sense of humor and arrogance.
And to facilitate that, Downey was given an office right next to Favreau during pre-production.
Which gave him this unusual access and, greater involvement in the screenwriting process than you'd typically see from a lead actor.
And that collaboration is what led directly to that famously improvisational atmosphere on set.
It did. They spent so much time locking down the story structure and planning the action sequences, which were complex, that when filming started, the dialogue was still very fluid.
It sounds like a frantic, creative, seat-of-your-pants process.
It was. Jeff Bridges, who played Obadiah Stane, famously described the whole thing as feeling like a $200 million student film.
Because they were just coming up with lines on the day.
On the day, making major character decisions right there in the moment.
But that spontaneity yielded the film's most memorable moments.
Yeah.
The entire flashy speech Stark gives when demonstrating the Jericho weapon.
That was pure Downey improvisation.
And, most significantly, the film's final, universe-shattering line.
The one that changed everything. The original script had Stark stick to the tradition of a secret identity, but Downey improvised that now iconic line, "I am Iron Man."
A move that just shattered the decades-old tradition of the superhero's secret identity. Right there at the end of the very first film.
It was a risky choice, but Favreau and the crew felt it was perfectly in line with Stark's brazen personality.
Moving from the creative chaos of the script to the physical reality of the film, it's easy to forget that this wasn't just a CGI cartoon.
No, not at all.
The film relied heavily on practical effects to give the technology real weight.
That was a deliberate choice to achieve believability. They wanted to show the construction and evolution of the suit in 3 distinct stages.
And they brought in Stan Winston's company for that.
The legendary Stan Winston's company. Favreau had worked with them before on Zasura, and they were brought in specifically to build actual metal and rubber versions of the armor.
And you can feel that commitment in the Mark I armor, the clunky prototype built in the cave. It looks exactly like what a captured genius could slap together from spare parts.
It was designed to look raw and utilitarian. They built a single version of the Mark I that weighed 41 kilograms, so about 90 pounds.
90 pounds for the actor's wear.
Yep. And they even intentionally designed the back to be less armored than the front, which visually foreshadows its single-minded focus on a forward offensive escape.
That must have been hell for Downey to wear on location in the heat. And the villain's armor was even more monumental.
The Ironmonger suit used by Obadiah Stane was an absolute behemoth. Stan Winston Studios created a massive 3.0-meter tall, 360-kilogram animatronic model.
So 10 feet tall and nearly 800 pounds.
Yeah. And to give you a sense of scale, that huge machine required 5 human operators just to manage the arm movements, and it was built on a gimbal to simulate the weight and motion of walking.
They really committed to the physical props before relying on digital.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the setting next. Favreau made a point of avoiding the traditional superhero backdrops we are used to, right?
That's right. Filming was primarily in California Playa Vista, Lone Pine, the Olancha Sand Dunes, specifically to differentiate Iron Man from the East Coast setting of most early superhero movies.
Even the Stark home interior was designed to look less like a sterile palace and more.
More Grease Monkey, a place where Tony actually worked on cars.
I love the obsessive commitment to realism they applied to Stark's imprisonment cave set. That just shows how detail-oriented the production was.
It speaks to the commitment to immersion. The cave set was massive, between 140 and 180 meters long.
And they actually cooled it down.
They did. The production designer saw footage of a Taliban fighter and realized that remote, high-altitude caves are actually very cold. So they went the extra mile and installed an air conditioning system in the set.
Just to replicate the cold breath and fog you'd see in a real cave.
Even though the California climate was warm outside, that's dedication.
And that commitment to realism extended to the military consultation, which ended up having a significant influence on the story's development.
The production had extensive cooperation with the U.S. military. The Department of Defense provided crucial assistance, like F-22 Raptors and HH-60 helicopters for the aerial shots.
And in exchange?
In exchange, the DoD consulted on scenes and dialogue. And this consultation actually resulted in a subtle but significant change to Tony Stark's core character arc.
How so?
He went from a character fundamentally opposed to arms deals to one who ends up selling his technology directly to the U.S. military.
That's a huge shift in the ethical framing of the movie, necessitated by that cooperation.
It is. On a lighter note, they also included some fantastic intentional fan service during the aerial combat.
The call signs.
Yes, to signal to the hardcore fans they were paying attention. They gave the 2 fighter jets that attack Iron Man the call signs Whiplash 1 and Whiplash 2.
Nodding to the future comic villain.
A great example of blending grounded realism with fun, self-referential lore.
Okay, now let's talk about the frantic endgame of production. Here's where outside pressures nearly broke the movie. When the editors started compiling the first edit in late 2007.
They realized the final act simply wasn't working.
That's not working.
It was deemed emotionally unsatisfying. The feedback was harsh. It was summarized simply as basically 2 robots punching each other.
No stakes.
None. No structural stakes or character depth. They tried shortening it, but that only made it abruptly anticlimactic. This was an existential crisis for the entire project.
And the fix was high pressure and extremely expensive because of the looming deadline of the 2007-2008 writer's strike.
The impending strike forced them to move with reckless speed. They had to rehire screenwriters Mark Markham and Matt Holloway right before the strike began.
A last-minute scramble.
That cost an additional $6 million just to fix the climax.
An expensive 11th-hour creative pivot. So what was the solution?
The brilliance of the solution was that it used an established limitation. They used a weakness set up earlier in the film, the fact that the Mark III suit freezes at high altitudes.
The icing problem.
The icing problem. That established constraint gave their climactic fight meaning beyond just brute force. But because the strike prevented more rewrites and Jeff Bridges couldn't film new material, they had to patchwork the ending together in post-production with whatever footage they had.
Despite all this chaos, the film was an immediate, massive, critical darling and a box office success.
It certainly was. It grossed over $585 million worldwide, making it the 8th highest grossing film of 2008.
But more importantly, the critics loved it.
Oh, they loved it. 94% approval on Rotten Tomatoes. Roger Ebert praised the film's deft intelligence, and he noted that Downey's performance powered the liftoff and separated it from typical superhero fare.
And that deft intelligence was reflected even in the scoring. Favreau insisted that Tony Stark was more of a rock star than a traditional hero.
He wanted a heavy metal tone for the music.
Which is how you get Tom Morello on the score.
That creative direction led composer Ramin Djawadi to create the core themes on guitar first. And famously, Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello contributed guitar performances, cementing that gritty, grounded, yet flashy aesthetic.
And then we get to the scene that changed everything. That little stinger at the very end, the post-credits scene with Nick Fury.
That was the moment of universe inception. Samuel L. Jackson had already been the model for the Ultimate Marvel version of Nick Fury, so the crew just decided to call him and ask if he'd be interested.
And they filmed it in secret.
With a skeleton crew to keep it totally secret. The dialogue was being changed right on set because they were still finalizing what the bigger universe even meant.
They were playing it so close to the chest that Marvel had the scene removed from all the preview prints just to maintain the surprise.
It became the ultimate word-of-mouth sensation for the wide release. And what's fascinating is how uncertain they were. They actually filmed an alternate version.
I heard about this.
Where Nick Fury referenced gamma accidents, radioactive bug bites, and assorted mutants, specifically mentioning Hulk, Spider-Man, and the X-Men.
But because Sony and 20th Century Fox held the film rights to Spider-Man and the X-Men at the time,
they had to cut it.
So they couldn't use that version.
Correct. The scene they kept was the perfect pivot, confirming that Stark had just become part of a bigger universe and that Fury wanted to discuss the Avenger Initiative.
And just like that, Phase 1 of the MCU was launched by a sequence filmed in secret with 3 people on a set.
It truly was a monumental achievement born out of chaos and artistic conviction. Iron Man succeeded not on spectacle alone, but on that unique collaboration between Favreau and Robert Downey Jr.
Who prioritized an honest, messy, and humorous character over strict scripting and formula.
And that success wasn't just limited to the theatrical run. The film's profitability was cemented on the home market almost immediately. The DVD sales were a massive indicator of the pent-up demand.
How significant was that initial push?
In its first week alone, Iron Man sold over 4 million copies, generating over $93 million in sales.
Wow.
This established a crucial and highly profitable home media audience that was ready to follow the nascent MCU wherever it went next, guaranteeing Phase 2 and beyond.
So, considering this film was selected for the National Film Registry for being historically significant, how much of its legacy relies less on the CGI spectacle of the Mark III and more on that singular improvisational choice by Robert Downey Jr. in the final moments?
That one line.
That one line when he shattered the tradition of the secret identity and declared, "I'm Iron Man." Think about the ripple effect of that one moment of audacity on every superhero story that followed, defining the tone for the next decade and a half of cinema.